Modifying color using levels. We can make color adjustments using levels. And again, there are two locations to find the levels panel. One is destructive, located under the image menu, and adjustments and levels. The second method is, of course, going over to my adjustments panel. This is the non-destructive method. So in levels, we're able to make modifications across a tonal range using the composite color channel, or we can choose individual channels. So when we are in levels, we see a histogram. And remember, a histogram is just a chart, it's a graph. And it represents the frequency distribution of colors, the number of times a particular pixel color occurs. The histogram displays light and dark color values on a linear scale. So the plotted data, like I mentioned, total number of pixels for a given tonal value. I'm going to navigate to one specific channel here so we can see it a bit better. The composite, the RGB, basically is combining all of these channels. And sometimes the composite, the RGB channel, will give us a non-accurate representation. So I'm going to go to red. And here we can see the number of pixels. So the lighter images, if I were to have a really light image, I would see that the histogram would have bunched. It would be really dense over here on the right. And a darker image would have the histogram being very dense or bunched up here on the left. So the three triangular sliders down here, we have one in the far left, one in the middle, and one on the right. And those triangular sliders appear beneath the histogram. They represent shadows, midtones, and highlights. So underneath of that, we see text boxes, 3 text boxes for input levels. So these are all input levels. You can see it says input levels right here. So the text boxes, then we have an input box for my shadows, for my midtones, and for my highlights. But below that, we have 2 text boxes that appear for the output levels. And so here I have just 2, and one is for shadows and one is for highlights. If we focus down here in the output levels, if I were to take my output slider here, the shadow slider, and I drag it to the right, it's going to decrease the contrast. Thus, the whole entire image will lighten. Kind of looks like a bad photo from the 70s. If I take the output slider and I take the highlight slider here and move it to the left, the absolute reverse is going to happen. It's going to decrease the contrast again, but it darkens the image. So we like to have that contrast. So we like to have things on both sides. Now up here in the input, if I take my midtone and drag it, you'll see that, again, same type of thing happens. As I drag to the right, it is going to lose some of that midtone. And so what I'm saying is these pixels here are my middle values. So that means this entire range here is from middle to shadow, meaning there's more, and it's going to darken. Reverse of that, I have more in the lighter areas. So my midtone to my highlights, I'm pushing those to be lighter. Okay. What we want to look for here is any unrealistic peaks. Now here I've got quite a few pixels here at the very top at 255. Now if I were to look at my color here, let's cancel out of this a second and look at my color in RGB. If I have 255 of a specific color, it's the most intense of that color channel, right? If I have 0, that means that my pixels are turned off or it's very dark. All right, this time I'm going to navigate to levels right here on that first, and we're going to use the properties panel. Same thing where you see I have red, green, and blue. We'll go to the red like we were working in previously. And I have all of my different numbers here. Now I can use my little samplers, my little eyedropper tool here to sample in the image to set my black point. Same with my middle or my highlight point. So if I want to display the clipping preview, I can press my Option key or my Alt key. In this case with the composite, you can see there's a few spikes here, and so you want to make sure that it's not some sort of a specular highlight or something really odd. I'm imagining I have a few little white areas in the flower, and that's probably what's triggering the white. So a lot of times you want to have your histogram fall in between. If you have something that shows nothing for a while and then a bunch of pixels, you might want to try to get your contrast and your tonal range to fit in between where those actual pixels are. Sometimes that's the quick fix for making your photo be much more intense. So in this case on my blue channel, I don't have a lot of pixels here up in this top portion. So if I drag this over to where the pixels start, sometimes that helps with color correcting. So you have to be careful not to go too far. So here versus here, a little bit of slight change just to make the image look a little richer. If you want to, while you're doing all of this, you can turn on just your histogram panel under Window and Histogram. The histogram panel will be a live update for what's happening. You can watch as you actually adjust the color settings. So you can watch a specific layer or the entire image, and you can watch specific channels. You can watch the luminosity if you want. And in this case, I can also view this under the drop-down menu in an expanded or compact view. So I can also choose to see all of my channels. So then I'm able to see what each channel is doing independently as I update it. Okay. So it's a great way to just to keep an eye if you understand how the histogram works. So overall, levels are used probably more commonly than curves. People tend to understand the histogram and where my shadows, midtones, and highlights fall a little bit easier here in the levels panel. Again, experimentation is the best way to learn.